is pollination. So students, till date we have learned about the formation of male gametophyte. That is, we have learned how pollen grains are formed, right? It is formed by the process of microsporogenesis. After the formation of microspores, pollen grains are formed. This pollen grain possesses vegetative cell and generative cell, and this generative cell is going to produce two male gametes. So pollen grain is a male gametophyte, right? We have also studied how an embryo sac is formed, right? An embryo sac is formed by metasporogenesis. This embryo sac will possess a large egg cell. So the embryo sac is called as female gametophyte. Where is this embryo sac formed? Embryo sac is formed in the ovule, which is present within the ovary, right? So pollen grains are formed, and within the ovary, within the ovule, embryo sac is also formed, which possesses female gamete, right? So now there should be the process of syngamy. There should be the process of fusion of the male gamete and the female gamete. So in case of plants, right, the first process, the process which occurs prior to it, is pollination. What is pollination? Transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma. Stigma possesses ovary. Ovary possesses ovule. Ovule possesses embryo sac, and embryo sac possesses egg. So transfer of the pollen grain from the anther to the stigma is called as pollination, right? This pollination is basically of two types, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination, right? This self-pollination is further of two types, that is autogamy and geitonogamy. Cross-pollination is also called as allogamy or xenogamy, right? So pollination is of two types, self and cross. Self-pollination is also of two types, that is autogamy and geitonogamy. What is autogamy? So again, pollination is transfer of the pollen grains, right? So there is a pollen grain which is present, right? So pollen grains are released by the dehiscence of the anther. These pollen grains will come on the stigma of the ovary, that is of the pistil, right? That transfer of the pollen grains which are released by the dehiscence of the anther, and those are transferred on the stigma, that is bulb-like structure, is called as pollination. It is of two types, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination is of two types, autogamy and geitonogamy. What is autogamy? So, transfer of pollen from anther to stigma of the same flower is called as autogamy. So this is a single flower. For this, what is the condition which is necessary? The flower should be bisexual flower. Then only it is possible. So if a flower is bisexual, which means a single flower possesses male reproductive part also, that is androecium also, and female reproductive part also, that is gynoecium also. So it possesses anther also, and it possesses the stigma style and ovary pistil part also, right? So if the pollen grains which are released from the anther will come and rest on the stigma of the same flower, that is called as autogamy. And for that, the flower should be bisexual flower, right? What is geitonogamy? Transfer of pollen from anther to stigma. So from anther of one flower to stigma of other flower of same plant. The plant should be same. When is this possible? This is possible if the plant possesses bisexual flowers, or if the plant possesses unisexual, but both, right? Both unisexual flowers. So this is a plant. Either the plant possesses all the bisexual flowers. So here is a flower, here is also a flower. This flower also possesses male and female reproductive part. This flower also possesses, it is bisexual flower. So the anther is going to release the pollen grain from this flower and it is going to come on the stigma of this flower. That condition is called as geitonogamy, right? Or if the flowers are unisexual flowers, right, but both the unisexual flowers present on the same plant. So this is a plant, this plant possesses male flower also and a female flower also. So the pollen grains from the male flower will come and rest on the stigma of the female flower. That condition is called as geitonogamy. Transfer of the pollen from the anther of one flower to the stigma of other flower of the same flower, right? These are the two types in self-pollination, right? So what happens in self-pollination? The plant is there, so the genetic makeup, the genes of the plant are same, right? So whether the anther is produced or whether the egg is produced, the genetic makeup is going to remain the same, right? So what are the benefits of self-pollination? The benefits are that it ensures pollination. It ensures pollination, right? And what you will obtain? You will obtain pure line. These are the benefits, right? These are the benefits of the self-pollination. What are the drawbacks of self-pollination? So because as I said that the genetic makeup is going to remain the same, right? So there can be possibility of inbreeding depression, right? When the same genes are getting mated, then the progenies which are formed are of the similar kind only. So you will get pure lines, but there will be inbreeding depression, which means genetic recombinations are absent in case of self-pollination, right? Cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is also called as allogamy or xenogamy. What is it? Transfer of pollen from anther of one flower to stigma of another flower of same, another flower of another plant, but though that plant should be of the same species, right? So transfer of the pollen grain. So this is one plant, this is another plant, right? Plants are only different. In self-pollination the plant was same, right? Same plant. So from this flower, if the pollen grains are coming and resting on the stigma of the another flower of another plant, plants are totally different but of the same species, this is very important, they should be of the same species, then it is called as cross-pollination, right? How is it possible? Self-pollination is easy, right? Because within the flower only, the flower are bisexual, right? So the pollen grains from anther are going to rest on the stigma. But for cross-pollination, there should be some pollinating agents. There are different kinds of pollinating agents. Which are those? Such as, say for example, wind, say for example, insects. Insects are the pollinating agents. Water, birds, animals, right? And there is a specific name given for it. If wind, air is the pollinating agent, such type of pollination is called as anemophily. It is called as anemophily. If insects are the pollinating agents, then it is called as entomophily. If water is helping in the process of pollination, it is called as hydrophily. If birds are helping, it is called as ornithophily. If animals are helping in pollination, in general animals such as monkeys, such as squirrels, then that is called as zoophily. Within animals also there is specificity. Say for example, if bats are helping in pollination, that is called as chiropterophily. Then say snails are helping in pollination, that is called as malacophily. If ants are helping in pollination, it is called as myrmecophily. So in short, cross-pollination is transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower of one plant to the stigma of another flower of another plant, but of the same species. So there is requirement of some pollinating agent. If wind is pollinating agent, the pollination is called as anemophily. If insects, it is called as entomophily. Water, hydrophily. Birds, it is called as ornithophily. Animals, zoophily. Bats, chiropterophily. Snails, malacophily. And ants are helping in pollination, transfer of pollen grains, then it is called as myrmecophily. Right? What is the benefit of cross-pollination? You will get genetic recombinations. And genetic variations is the benefit, right? So there will be recombinations, new genes, because there are two different plants of the same species. So their genes will merge. So there will be genetic recombinations and variations. What is the drawback? Right? So the drawback is pollination is occurring by any of the agent. Say for example wind, right? So if this is one flower, if this is another flower, this flower is at an edge, right? There are no other flowers on this side, right? So this flower, and if the direction of the wind is this way, right? Then from this flower, the anther, say these are the two flowers, right? If the direction of the wind is this, then from this flower, the anther, the pollen grains are going to rest on the stigma. This is the end portion, say a seashore. But if the direction of the wind is this, then how will this flower get the pollen grains? Because the direction of wind is on this direction and there are no further plants. So this is a drawback. Because we have a need of some pollinating agent, right? So if that pollinating agent doesn't function properly, then pollen grains can be wasted, right? So drawback is wasting of pollen grains if pollinating agent becomes non-functional. So both the pollinations are having its own benefits and its own drawback. Benefits of self-pollination: it ensures pollination, that is guaranteed pollination, and pure lines will be obtained. But what is the drawback of it? There will not be any genetic recombinations, there will be inbreeding depression, because there is self-pollination, the genes are going to remain the same, right? What is the benefit of cross-pollination? There will be genetic variations, genetic recombinations. But what is the drawback? The drawback is, because it depends upon the pollinating agent. If the pollinating agent becomes non-functional, all the pollen grains will be wasted, right? So we have studied about the types of pollination, right? Now we will study about that what are the contrivances of self-pollination and cross-pollination, which means how the flowers are adapting for self-pollination or for cross-pollination. Our next topic is contrivances for self-pollination. What does that mean? Contrivances for self-pollination means what are the adaptations that a flower or a plant should make to favor the self-pollination, which means the plant wants self-pollination. They want that there should not be any genetic recombinations, which means there is self-breeding, right? So what are the adaptations which the plants have or which the plants make to favor self-pollination? Those are called as contrivances of self-pollination. The first one is bisexuality or hermaphrodite. Obviously this is necessary. The flower should be a bisexual flower, which means a single flower should possess both male and female reproductive part. Such a flower is called as hermaphrodite or a bisexual flower. And because it possesses both male and female reproductive part, it would be able to produce both male and female gametes. So there will be self-pollination. So the first contrivance is bisexuality, right? Then the second one is homogamy. What does that mean, right? Though both the flower possesses both male and female reproductive part, what happens if male reproductive part matures first? If it matures first, the anther is going to release the pollen grains, and thereby still the stigma ovary is not ready for acceptance of that pollen grain. Then also there will not be self-pollination, right? So what is homogamy? Both the male and female reproductive parts are there. The flower is a bisexual flower, but both male and female reproductive parts should mature at the same time. Both male and female reproductive parts should mature. Mature means they should be now able to release the pollen grain, or they should be having an embryo sac. Should mature at the same time. This is an adaptation. This is going to favor self-pollination. If those will not mature at the same time, one will mature first then the other, then self-pollination will not happen. Then there will be cross-pollination. So that is an adaptation for cross-pollination. So both are maturing at the same time. That is homogamy, which means it ensures it is favoring self-pollination. Then the third one is some plants possesses cleistogamous flowers. So the adaptation or contrivance is called as cleistogamy. What is the meaning of cleistogamy? Which means the flowers are closed flowers in the form of buds, and sexual reproductive parts are enclosed the flower is a closed flower. It is like a bud. The flower is closed and the flower possesses both male part as well as female reproductive part. So if the flower is closed, how will the pollen grains go outside? Right? Or how will the stigma receive the pollen grains from some other flower? Because the flower is closed. Both male and female reproductive parts are enclosed in the flower. Such flowers are called as cleistogamous flowers. This is very important, right? So example of cleistogamy is oxalis, viola, commelina, right? These are the plants which possesses cleistogamous flowers also, which means you have to remember this. This is very important, the examples of cleistogamous flowers. So these plants possesses both the types of flowers. One is cleistogamous and other is chasmogamous. So what is cleistogamous flower? Say this is the thalamus or the receptacle, and these are the sepals of the flower. But all these sepals are closed. So the flower itself is closed. Within it, it possesses ovary, stigma and style, and there will be anthers, that is filament and anther also. But the flower is a closed flower. So where will the pollen grains go? It is not going to go anywhere. The pollen grains from the anther are going to be released on the stigma of the same flower. Or from where will the stigma receive the other pollen grains? So it favors cross-pollination. So oxalis, viola, commelina, all these plants possesses cleistogamous flowers also. They also possesses chasmogamous flowers. So cleistogamous flowers are closed flowers and these are open flowers. We know open flowers, right? All the sepals are open, so the male and female reproductive parts are exposed. They are not enclosed, right? So cleistogamy and the presence of cleistogamous flowers is one more contrivance or adaptation for the favor of self-pollination, right? Then one more adaptation for self-pollination is there are certain flowers, certain plants which adapt for self-pollination. Say for example, in Vinca rosea plant, what adaptation is there? So flower is very small and funnel shaped flower, right? This is the receptacle of the flower and this is the funnel shaped flower, right? So this is the receptacle and that is the funnel shaped flower. The flower is narrow and funnel shaped, right? So what happens in Vinca rosea? This is the ovary, style and stigma. It is short and anthers are present above it like this, right? So this is male reproductive part, this is female reproductive part. Now what happens when the anther matures and those are ready for dehiscence, right? So when anther matures and is ready for dehiscence, what will happen? The style is going to elongate, right? So this style is going to elongate and the stigma will come upside. So now the pollen grains which are released from this anthers will come on the stigma. So it is favoring self-pollination. So when the anther matures and is ready for the dehiscence, the style elongates. and reaches at the level of egg. That happens in Vincarosia plant. Then one more adaptation, it is seen in Mirabilis jalapa. It is also called as 4 o'clock plant. What happens in this? The anther is bending. So when the anther is ready for the dehiscence, when it is mature, so this is, say this is the ovary, style and stigma, and this are the anthers. So when the anthers are ready, what will happen? The anther is going to bend like this. So the pollen grains which are released will rest on the stigma of the same flower, right? So in Mirabilis jalapa, what happens? Anther bends on the stigma of flower, right? So that is one more adaptation for the self-pollination. One more adaptation is seen in potato plants, that is Solanum tuberosum. Again, when the anther is mature and it is ready for dehiscence, what happens? The style coils around anther and accepts the pollen grains released from anther. So these are some of the adaptations which favors self-pollination. Which are those adaptations? Number 1, the flower should be bisexual or hermaphrodite, which means the flower should possess both male and female reproductive part. Then second adaptation, homogamy, which means male and female reproductive parts should mature at the same time. If anther matures first, then the style will not receive, style is not ready. If style matures first, then anther is not ready for the release of pollen grains. So both should mature at the same time. Third adaptation is cleistogamy, which means the flowers should be closed flowers, cleistogamous flowers, right? The reproductive part should be enclosed, the flower should be like a bud. Examples are very important: oxalis, viola and commelina. These plants possesses both cleistogamous flowers, which are closed flowers, as well as chasmogamous flowers, which are open flowers. Cleistogamy favors self-pollination and chasmogamy, which means the flowers are open flowers. Chasmogamy favors cross-pollination. Right, so these are the contrivances of self-pollination. Right, our next topic is what are the adaptations which the plants make for cross-pollination. These are the adaptations which the plants make to favor self-pollination. Okay, so students, our next topic is contrivances for cross-pollination. So we have studied what are the adaptations the plants make to favor self-pollination. Now we have to study what are the adaptations that a plant makes to favor cross-pollination. We know the drawbacks of self-pollination also, as well as cross-pollination also, right? So cross-pollination, its benefit, its plus point is that it will result in genetic recombinations and variations, whereas the drawback of it is that for cross-pollination there is need of some agent, whether that agent is wind, water, some insects or some kind of animals, but there is need of some agency. So if that agency becomes non-functional, then the pollen grains will be wasted, right? But there are some of the adaptations which the plants make so that they will favor cross-pollination and not self-pollination. Which are those contrivances? The first one is Uni Sexuality, right? So the contrivances for self-pollination was bisexuality. The flower should be a bisexual flower. Over here, the flower should be a unisexual flower, right? So it should possess only and only one sex. It should not possess both androecium as well as gynoecium. Such are called as unisexual flowers, and that contrivance is called as unisexuality. So the flowers can be of two types, that is monoecious or dioecious. Monoecious means single plant has male and female flowers. Dioecious means that there are different plants only. There is male plant and there is female plant, which means a single plant will have only one sex flower. Example in both the cases, right? It will favor cross-pollination. Example of monoecious condition is maize, castor. Example of dioecious plants are papaya and date palm, right? So monoecious, a same plant, will possess male flowers and female flowers. So there are chances that whenever there is any help of pollinating agent, the pollen grains which are released from one male flower will reach to the stigma of the another flower of another plant, because we need cross pollination. So if a single flower will possess both anther and stigma, both, right, then there will be self pollination. So monoecious plants, right, maize and castor. Dioecious plants, the plants are only different. There is a male papaya plant, there is female papaya plant. There is the male date palm, there is female date palm. So it will favor cross pollination. The second adaptation for cross pollination is dichogamy. Right? It means that maturation of male and female reproductive organs occur at different time, right? So say if a flower is a bisexual flower, which means it is having male reproductive part also as well as female reproductive part. A single flower is having both. But still, if that plant want to favor cross-pollination, how is it possible? There should be dichogamy. Homogamy was favoring self-pollination when both androecium and gynoecium matures at the same time. In this case, either the male part will mature first or the female part will mature first. Right? So there are two types. That is protandrous. What is protandrous? That is maturation of male reproductive part occurs first. Examples of protandrous flowers are, say for example, salvia, helianthus, cotton, okra. Right? So what does that mean? A flower possesses male as well as female reproductive part, but the flower is protandrous type, which means androus means androecium. So the male reproductive part is going to mature first and the female reproductive part is not going to mature. So the male reproductive part matures, the anther is going to release the pollen grain, but the stigma is not ready for the acceptance of pollen grain, so it will not be able to receive the pollen grain. So obviously those pollen grains will be carried by some agent to some different plant, right? So it will favor cross pollination. Second is proto-gynous type, that is maturation of female reproductive part occurs first, right? That is, gynoecium is going to mature first. So the style is ready, the stigma is ready for the acceptance of pollen grain of the same flower, but the anther is not ready for the dehiscence. So how will it receive the pollen grain of the same flower of the same plant? Obviously it is going to receive the pollen grain from some other plant, so it favors cross pollination. Examples of protogynous flowers are mirabilis, jalpa, ranunculus, custard, apple. Right? These are the examples of protogynous flowers. Right? So these are the contrivances for the cross-pollination. Then the next contrivance. So we have studied two contrivances or two adaptations. Uni Sexuality, the flowers are either monoecious or dioecious. Example of monoecious flowers are maize and castor. Example of dioecious plants are papaya and date palm. And dichogamy, which means if a flower is a bisexual flower, then maturation of either male or female reproductive part will occur first, and the other part is not going to mature yet. Right? It is protandrous, where male reproductive part matures first. Example is helianthus, salvia, cotton. And protogynous, where female reproductive part matures first. Example is mirabilis, jalpa, ranunculus, and custard. Then the next contrivance for the cross-pollination is heterostyly. The name itself says hetero means different and styly means style, right? So style is of different length. We will take the example so that we will understand, right? Example of it is oxalis, evening prime rose. These are the flowers which have heterostyly, right? Say for example, evening prime rose possesses two types of flowers, right? Which are those flowers, right? So say this is the flower, and this flower is resting on a body, that is the receptacle. This is the style, ovary, style, and stigma, right? And over here is the anther, right? So style is very long, style is elongated, right? Such type of flowers are called as pin-eyed flowers, right? And there is one more condition. This is the thalamus. These are the flowers. The pistil part, that is ovary, style, and stigma, is short. The style is very short. So this is stigma, this is style, and this is ovary. And over here are the presence of the anther. Such type of flowers are called as thrum-eyed, right? So there are pin-eyed and there are thrum-eyed flowers, in which the length of style is different. Pin-eyed possesses an elongated style and thrum-eyed possesses a shorter style. So over here the anthers are much more below the stigma portion. So the pollen grains which are released from the anther are not able to reach to the stigma portion, right? And over here the stigma is very low, right? So the anther which are releasing the pollen grains, those pollen grains will be thrown outside, will be carried outside. So this will favor cross-pollination, that is heterostyly. Evening primrose have two types of flowers. Oxalis have three types of flowers. One is pin-eyed, second is crumb-eyed, and third is normal, where the length of the style and the length of the filament of the anther is of the same length, right? Those are of same length. Over here style is of longer length and the filament is of shorter length. Over here style is of shorter length and the filament is of the longer length. It is much above, right? So this is the contrivance for cross-pollination, that is heterostyly. Then the next contrivance for the cross-pollination is self-incompatibility. Example of it is Solanum family, such as potatoes. Other example is of tobacco. So self-incompatibility, what does that mean, right? Say this is the stigma, style and ovary of one flower, of one plant, right? Say this is the pollen grain of the same plant, and that is why we have drawn it with the same color. One plant possesses is a bisexual plant, say for example. So it possesses the male part also as well as female part also. So this is the stigma, and this stigma received the pollen grain of the same plant. Then this pollen grain will not be able to germinate. If it receives the pollen grain of other plant of the same species, then only this pollen grain will be able to germinate and produce the pollen tube. That condition is called as self-incompatibility. What does that mean? That the pollen grain of same plant will not be able to germinate at all, right? So this pollen grain is not able to germinate at all. Only the pollen grain from the different plant of the same species will only be able to germinate, right? Then the next adaptation for cross-pollination is prepotency. It is very similar to self-incompatibility. There is only a minor difference, right? So this is the stigma, style and ovary, right? This is the pollen grain of the same plant, which means the genes of the pollen grain as well as of the egg will be same, right? There will be genetic similarity, right? So this is the pollen grain of the same plant. If this pollen grain of the same plant is resting on the stigma, it will not be able to germinate. If the pollen grain of some other plant of the same species will come, then it will be able to germinate and produce the pollen tube. But what if the pollen grain of other plant not come at all, right? Then this pollen grain will have the chance to germinate. That is called as prepotency. Example is peach, mean? The pollen grain of the other plant of same species have the first priority to germinate, but if it fails, then pollen grain of same plant will germinate. So first preference is given to this pollen grain, but if this pollen grain of other plant will not come at all, then this pollen grain will be able to germinate. That is prepotency. In case of self-incompatibility, there is the pollen grain of the same plant is not going to germinate at all. It requires the pollen grain of some other plant of the same species only. So that is the next contrivance for the cross-pollination. Then the next example is herpogamy. It means that there is a physical barrier between the pollen grain and stigma. Right? Example of herpogamy is calotropis. Right? So there will be pollinium. Which is formed. What is that? Right? So it is a balloon-like structure. Say this is pollinium. It is a balloon and a bag-like structure. And within this pollinium are enclosed the pollen grains. Right? So pollen grains are enclosed within a bag-like structure, that is pollinium. So this pollinium is acting as a physical barrier, right? So if this pollinium which possesses the pollen grains is going to come on the stigma of the same plant, then this barrier is not going to get destroyed or it is not going to get burst, right? But if this pollinium is going to rest on the stigma of some other plant of the same species, then this pollinium is going to get burst or it is going to get released, and it is going to release the pollen grains on the stigma of the other plant of the same species. So it is going to favor cross-pollination. Clear? And so these are the contrivances or adaptations which the plants make to favor cross-pollination. Which are those? So which contrivances we have learned? We will quickly revise it. Which are the adaptations for cross-pollination? First is Uni Sexuality. The flower is either monoecious or dioecious. Example is maize and castor. Over here, example is papaya and date. Right? Then second is dichogamy. Maturation of male and female reproductive parts occurs at different times. Protandrous or proto-gynous type. Here male reproductive part matures first. Example is cotton, salvia, helianthus. Here female reproductive part matures first. Example is mirabilis, ranunculus. Then the third contrivance is heterostyly. Right? The flowers can be pin-eyed, thrum-eyed. right, or normal type. Example is evening time rose or oxalis. Then the fourth one is self-incompatibility, where the pollen grain of the same plant is not going to germinate at all. Example is potato, tobacco. Then there is prepotency, where the first priority is given to the pollen grain of other plant. But if that fails, then the pollen grain of same plant will be able to germinate. Example is apple, peach. And the sixth one is herpogamy, where there is physical barrier. That physical barrier is called as pollinium. It is a sac-like structure which encloses pollen grains. Example is calotropis. Right? So, these are the contrivances for cross-pollination. There are a few points which you have to remember. What is the meaning of viability of pollen grain? Right? So pollen grain is a male gametophyte. It possesses male gamete. Right? So pollen grain reaches to the stigma of a flower. Then pollen grain germinates. Pollen grain possesses male gamete. Then this male gamete will enter into the embryo sac and there will be fusion of the male and female gamete. So there is some time period which is required and which is present between it. Right? So what is viability of the pollen grain? It is the time period for which pollen grain possessing male gametes is able to fertilize the female gamete present in embryo sac. Right? So if that viability of the pollen grain is lost, which means that time period is lost, there is more time required, then that pollen grain will not be able to germinate or the male gamete will not be able to fertilize. Right? The viability of pollen grains are different for different plants. Right? Say for example wheat and rice. Right? The viability of the pollen grains is for only 30 minutes. Which means that within the period of 30 minutes, if the pollen grain of this plant reaches to the stigma, then only the male gamete will be able to fertilize the female gamete. After 30 minutes are over, these pollen grains are of no use. Right? Whereas the viability of most of the plants is for few hours. Right? So that is viability of the pollen grain. The smallest pollen grain, the largest pollen grain and the longest pollen grain. The smallest pollen grain is of Myosotis. The largest pollen grain is of the plant, that is Mirabilis jalpa, and the longest pollen grain is of the Zostera plant. Right? This is around 2500 micrometers in length. this is around 250 micrometer, and this is around 25 micrometer. So it is the smallest pollen grain, right? In the next topic, our next topic is, we have studied about there are different types of pollinating agents. There are biotic pollinating agents and non-biotic pollinating agents. Wind, water, animals, ant, snail, bats, birds, all are pollinating agents. So how they are helping in pollination we will study in the next part.